my experience of online trolling, I guess, is different in some ways. A lot of it has been about the journalism I do. So I investigate social media at the BBC, everything disinformation, trolling, conspiracy theories. I do a lot for BBC podcasts like Radio 4, for Panorama, for BBC Current Affairs documentaries, for BBC News. And ever since I started doing my job, it has made me somewhat a lightning rod for the trolls and all sorts. So I'm a bit like the kind of person who has run towards the fire, which is maybe wise in journalism terms, but not wise in general life terms. And I think my experience of it has very much been, and it's certainly, I would say the problem has increased rather than the opposite. You just get used to it. And I think actually this question of why is so important. And if we're thinking about the positives to this, so I guess starting with the bad stuff, I'm one of the most trolled correspondents at the BBC. I receive a huge volume of misogynistic, other forms of abuse, threats, people turning up at the BBC, people who are physically threatening me. I'm very fortunate to not get racist abuse, other kinds of harassment and abuse that persecuted journalists at the BBC face, our BBC Persian service, other people who work in the World Service departments at the BBC. But nonetheless, it does impact you and impact your ability to do your job. And for me, the way of dealing with it has actually been always focusing on that why question, because actually so much of it is about understanding why these things are happening. It's about unpicking the tactics at play. As a journalist, it's like, okay, what's happening to me? The abuse, the harassment, the forms it takes, who's doing it, why it's amplified. That is all part of the story. And actually being able to then better understand the world that I investigate, this kind of conspiracy land I often refer to, and also to understand the people who are impacted by it. We're sitting here all as people who, in different ways, have had been targeted on online abuse and are kind of in a position actually to be able to sort of call it out and talk about it. There are so many people who are not in this room who experience online abuse in all sorts of ways, all across the country. I hear from them all the time. People who've survived terror attacks, people who've lived through the worst things you could possibly imagine, who are told that the things they live through aren't real, who are told that they deserve to die and all sorts of other horrible things. And so I think it's important to kind of think of that when we're talking about this, because we're actually in a position, I guess, to kind of perhaps think about and know what to do about it, whereas there are all sorts of people who kind of aren't able to do that. And I think that one of the really positive things I've found is just concentrating on that why, actually, which may sound a bit bonkers, but going and meeting the people who post the abuse, going and actually sitting down with them. There was a man who I went and met who'd posted abuse directed at a female footballer. Some of it was very misogynistic, some of it was racist, and he agreed to speak to me. And I went and met him. It was kind of as you would imagine meeting a troll is. So we met in a car park. This was, he was in his car, we were in our car, and then we kind of followed him, and then we went to this kind of place where he was sort of working, and we were in this really small room, and it was me and a couple of producers and the guy who was sending the abuse. He was absolutely lovely. He was so polite. He was really friendly to us. He was as any human being would be. And so much of this is about the way, to the whole conversation about social norms, the way that social media as a kind of concept can distort perhaps the way people behave or what people think is acceptable in terms of how they behave. And when we kind of got into it and I was focusing on that why are you doing this? And he was upset and he was angry and he was frustrated. And people like this man, deserve to be held accountable for what they've done. But it's also actually really important to understand he was not a bad person, but he was behaving in a way that was obviously causing really serious harm. And he didn't really understand that. And he spoke about, he was like, oh, my son thinks I'm a troll, and I post my stuff on my iPad, and I just close it, and I just go to bed. And you think of, if you've experienced online abuse in this way, you think of, the amount it will stop you going to sleep, or you'll be lying there thinking, God, that's awful. Or is, someone going to break into my house, or am I going to be safe? And he'd just gone, great, good night, everyone, that'll be that. And I think so much of this is about the interaction between people and the social media platforms. It's about the normalization of stuff. So for him, when it had gone out, this podcast episode, it was an episode of this Why Do You Hate Me series I'd done, he was more worried about the people who support him online thinking that he'd somehow rode back or apologized than he was actually about broader society saying, why have you sent those messages? He was more worried about those people online than he was his kids, hearing the interview. And I think that, to this point about in and out groups, kind of tells you about like what people care about and what is normalized and how that changes. So I think that there's a huge value in, certainly for me, when I deal with the trolling, and actually doing something about it, investigating it, exposing it, understanding why people do what they do. And I think also understanding, for me, the social media platforms, the role of the algorithms, the recommendation systems, the content that's pushed, the way that that can normalize or distort our perception of kind of what's okay and what's not okay.